The stranger in the back booth, the aroma of freshly baked bread and sizzling garlic butter drifted through the air of the high-end restaurant tucked away on a quiet street in Los Angeles. The walls were lined with photographs of celebrities, world leaders, and Hollywood elites, all smiling with the house chef or holding up a dish like it was a trophy. It was a place known for elegance, five-star dishes, and a no-nonsense attitude from the head chef, Marco Bellini. Marco was a man who believed in perfection. Every plate had to be art, every sauce, a story. But beneath his polished chef coat and rehearsed smile was a sharp tongue and a quick temper. He didn't tolerate mistakes, nor did he like people who didn't look the part. His kitchen was his kingdom, and he was the untouchable king. On a rainy Wednesday evening, the restaurant buzzed with the clinking of wine glasses and soft music playing in the background. Couples whispered across candlelit tables, businessmen talked deals, and waiters moved swiftly through the maze of tables with polished grace. But in the far back booth, partially hidden in the dim lighting, sat a quiet man in a worn leather jacket, a black cap pulled low over his face. His presence didn't match the glamour of the place, and that made Marco uneasy. The man had arrived alone, didn't make a reservation, and barely said a word, except to politely ask for the day's special. He didn't fuss. He didn't name drop, and he certainly didn't act like someone who belonged there. Marco, who noticed every detail in his restaurant, eyed the man from across the room. "See that guy?" Marco muttered to his sous chef, folding his arms. "Back booth. Looks like he just walked in off the street. Who let him in?" The sous chef shrugged. "I think the hostess thought he was someone important. She said he looked familiar." Marco scoffed. "Familiar? Maybe she watches too many movies." As the night went on, Marco kept glancing over. Something about the stranger bothered him. He didn't sip wine. He didn't even take pictures of the food like most guests did. He just ate slowly, with quiet appreciation. When the waitress returned to ask if he wanted dessert, he smiled gently and said, "Everything's perfect. Please thank the chef." That was the final straw for Marco. "Thank the chef," he muttered mockingly. "He thinks he's doing me a favor?" Without waiting, Marco stormed from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. He walked straight to the booth and stood there, arms folded. "I hear you like the food," he said, voice stiff. The man looked up. His face was tired but kind, his eyes deep and thoughtful. There was a faint smile on his lips. "Yes," he said. "It was peaceful." Marco narrowed his eyes. "Peaceful? Food isn't peaceful. Food is energy. It's fire. It's emotion." The man nodded slowly. "It can be all that, but tonight it was peaceful." The tone of the man's voice unnerved Marco more than any insult would have. It was calm, grounded. He wasn't trying to win anything. He was just being honest. "Do you cook?" Marco asked sarcastically. "You talk like you do." "I've spent a little time in kitchens," the man replied gently. "Yeah? Flipping burgers?" Marco sneered. The man gave a soft laugh, not mocking, not angry, just amused. "Something like that." Marco shook his head. "Listen, next time you come, dress a little more appropriately. This place has standards." The man didn't respond. He just smiled, placed a folded bill on the table with the receipt, and quietly said, "Have a good night." He walked out without a fuss, disappearing into the rain. The next morning, the restaurant staff arrived early. The pastry chef was setting up. The delivery truck was backing in. Marco walked in with a coffee and noticed everyone standing awkwardly near the front counter, whispering. He set his cup down and frowned. "What's going on?" he asked. The hostess stepped forward, holding her phone with wide eyes. "Chef, you might want to see this." She played a video that was already going viral. There, on a fan-recorded clip, was the man from the booth walking through the rain toward a sleek black car. Just as he was about to get in, He looked up and gave the camera a soft wave. Is that Keanu Reeves? Marco said slowly. The staff nodded. He was here? Marco blinked. Last night? Yes, the hostess whispered. You mocked Keanu Reeves to his face. Marco's stomach dropped. The video continued. The fan's voice could be heard. Keanu, why that restaurant? Keanu's answer was soft but clear. I helped build it, years ago, before the fame. I washed dishes in the back. The man who first hired me believed everyone deserved a chance. I come back here when I need to remember that. Silence fell in the kitchen. Marco stared at the screen, unable to move. The man he had mocked was the one who helped build the very dream Marco now stood inside. And he had no idea. Just then, his phone rang. The number was private. He answered with a hesitant hello. This is Keanu, the voice said calmly. We need to talk. The story behind the kitchen walls. Marco couldn't feel his hands as he lowered the phone. The voice on the other end had been steady, quiet, and unmistakably real. Keanu Reeves. The same man he had mocked the night before now wanted to talk. No security, no lawyers, just a conversation. And in that simple request, Marco felt something strange clawing at his chest. Not fear, not even embarrassment. It was something deeper. It was shame. The restaurant opened that morning like usual, but the air was different. Whispers floated through the staff like ripples in water. The hostess couldn't stop replaying the video. The waiters kept glancing toward the booth where Keanu had sat. And Marco stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at the knives, the pans, the cutting boards, as if they were strangers. He hadn't told anyone about the call. He didn't know if he should. What would he even say? Hey team, remember the guy I treated like dirt? Yeah, turns out he basically founded the place. But it wasn't just about being wrong. It was about something Marco couldn't admit even to himself. That somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what this place was really built for, the Sai. Meeting with Keanu was set for after closing, and as the hours passed, Marco couldn't concentrate. Every order he called out sounded hollow. Every dish he plated looked more like a performance than a passion. He thought back to his early days, when he cooked because it made people happy, not because it made him powerful. When night finally fell and the last guest left, Marco stood alone in the dining area. The lights were dim. The chairs were stacked. The music was off. And then, the door opened. Keanu walked in without a word. He wore the same leather jacket, still damp from the light drizzle outside. His steps were quiet, his face unreadable. Marco swallowed and stepped forward. Listen, he began, voice rough. About last night? Keanu raised a hand gently. Don't. Not yet. He walked past Marco, looking around the place. His eyes scanned the photos on the wall, the polished wood of the counter, the soft glow of the kitchen lights that spilled onto the floor. You ever meet Gustavo? Keanu asked, still facing the wall. Marco frowned. Who? Gustavo. The first head chef here. He started it all. Took a chance on people. Didn't care what you looked like. Just cared that you showed up on time and gave your best. Marco shook his head slowly. I never met him. He died before I took over. Keanu finally turned. To him. I washed dishes in that kitchen, he said quietly. I was 20, broke, no name. Gustavo didn't ask questions. Just handed me an apron and told me not to be late again. There was a long silence between them. The kind that weighed heavier than words. I've tried to come back here every few years, Keanu said. Not as a celebrity, just as a reminder. This place isn't about ego, it's about second chances, about building something that lifts people up. Marco looked down at the floor. I didn't know. You didn't ask. The words hit, like a knife through cloth, soft but sharp. People walk in here every day, Keanu continued. Some wear suits, some wear hoodies. Some are rich. Some are just dreaming. They all want one thing, respect, and food is one of the purest ways to give it. Marco's throat tightened. He felt exposed, like someone had taken the mask off his face and held up a mirror. "I've worked hard for this place," he said defensively. "I've sacrificed everything." "I know," Keanu said. "But somewhere along the way, it became about you. And that's not what this place was built on." Marco sat down heavily in one of the booths. His hands trembled. "I don't know how to fix it." Keanu sat across from him, quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "It starts with humility." Those words settled in Marco's chest like a stone dropped in still water. Humility. It wasn't a word he used often, maybe never. "There's more," Keanu said. "There are things happening that you don't know. This place, it's about to change." Marco looked up. "What do you mean?" Keanu leaned forward, voice lower now. "You think you run this restaurant, but the lease, the name, the ownership papers, Gustavo left them in someone else's hands before he died. And now that person's coming back." Marco's heart skipped. "Who?" Keanu stood slowly. "Someone who believes in giving people chances, even people who mess up." Marco stood, too, now confused and nervous. "Are you saying?" Keanu nodded. "I'm not here to take your place. I'm here to see if you still deserve it." The lights flickered above them. The rain picked up outside. And for the first time in years, Marco felt small. Not because he was weak, but because he had forgotten how big kindness really was. Just then, the door opened again, and a woman walked in. She was older, carried a folder, and wore a necklace, shaped like a tiny frying pan. "You must be Marco," she said gently. "I'm Elena, Gustavo's daughter." Marco's mouth fell open. Keanu smiled. "You two have a lot to talk about," he said. The will and the whisper, the silence that filled the restaurant after Elena spoke was not empty. It was dense. Marco stared at her, his thoughts spiraling like boiling water with no lid. She had Gustavo's eyes, that same calm fire, the kind that looked through noise and saw truth. Her voice was steady, but her presence unsettled him more than any food critic ever had. Elena moved toward the center of the room, slowly taking in the restaurant her father had once dreamed into life. She ran her hand along the counter with care, as though touching the past. Keanu stood back, watching both of them, arms relaxed, as if this moment had long been written. Marco finally found his voice. "Gustavo's daughter. But I thought—" "He didn't have family," Elena offered a faint smile. "He kept me private. I wasn't part of his world when he started this. I was living overseas, finishing school. We were distant for many years. But toward the end of his life, we reconnected. He told me about this place, about the people he helped, about the dishwasher who always came in early to prep, who once offered to mop the floors just to learn how to cook properly." She looked toward Keanu, who smiled softly in return. "He said he believed in second chances," Elena continued. "He left this place to someone who shared that belief. Someone who knew what it felt like to have nothing. Someone who would carry forward the heart of what he built." Marco slowly sank into a booth. His hands were cold, his breath unsteady. "So, it wasn't me." Keanu walked over and sat beside Elena. "You kept it alive, Marco. You didn't destroy it, but you also didn't protect what mattered most, the soul of it." Marco wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. Deep down, he knew they were right. He had turned the restaurant into a temple of perfection and status. The warmth, the humanity. He'd left those behind somewhere between his third review in the paper and his first television appearance. Elena opened the folder she had brought. It contained old photos, letters in her father's handwriting, and at the very bottom, a folded legal document. She placed it gently on the table. "My father left this place in trust," she said, "and the trustee has been silent for years." "Until now." Marco leaned forward. "Who's the trustee?" Keanu exhaled deeply. "I am." The words landed like thunder. Marco blinked, his world shifting beneath him. "You? But why didn't you say anything last night?" Keanu's expression softened. "Because respect isn't forced. It's earned. I wanted to see how you treat people when you think they can't offer you anything." Marco looked down at the table. He felt stripped, raw. Every inch of pride he had built now felt like a thin veil over his own insecurity. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Elena leaned in. "That's up to you. Gustavo believed in learning from our worst moments. You don't have to lose this place. But you do have to change." Keanu added, "You can still be the chef. But this isn't your kingdom. It's a community." A quiet tear escaped down Marco's cheek, surprising even him. He hadn't cried in years. He thought emotion was weakness. But now, in front of two people who had every reason to dismiss him, he felt something else. Relief. He nodded slowly. "I want to make things right." Keanu reached across the table and placed his hand on Marco's. "Then we'll do it together." The next morning came with golden light pouring through the windows. Marco entered the kitchen not as a king, but as a student. He walked to the dishwasher, shook the man's hand, and asked for his name. He thanked the prep cook. He complimented the server, who stayed late to polish the glassware. Throughout the day, something began to shift. The staff noticed the difference. Not in what Marco said, but in how he moved. He didn't bark. He asked. He didn't criticize. He encouraged. For the first time in years, the kitchen buzzed with something more than heat and haste. It buzzed. With life. Elena stayed close, observing. She offered suggestions, old recipes from her father's journals, gentle guidance about the flow of things. She wasn't trying to take over. She was trying to help rebuild the spirit of the place. As for Keanu, he returned that evening. He walked in not as a stranger, not as a movie star, but as someone coming home. Marco had saved a table for him, this time with care, not caution. He personally delivered the dish Keanu had ordered, the same one as the night he was mocked. "This time," Marco said, setting the plate down, "I cooked it with gratitude." Keanu nodded. "I can taste the difference." They shared a small smile. But just as the moment softened into something warm and healing, Elena approached from the back with a letter in her hand. Her face was pale. "We have a problem." She said. Marco and Keanu both looked at her, alert. "This letter," she said, "was sent from a lawyer representing a rival investor. Someone who's been trying to buy this land for years." Keanu stood up. "Who?" Elena's voice trembled. "A billionaire restaurant mogul. He just bought out the building next door. And he's suing us for breach of ownership rights. He wants to demolish this place." Marco's heart thudded in his chest. Keanu's jaw tightened. The past may have returned to heal them, but the future just declared war. The ghost in the blueprints, the letter sat on the polished table like a ticking bomb, its edges neat, its words laced with quiet cruelty. Marco stared at it, his mind numb. The logo on the top corner, Silverstone Dining Group, felt like a bad memory clawing back into focus. He had heard of them. Everyone in the industry had. They didn't build restaurants to feed souls. They built them to conquer cities, turning food into money and menus into weapons. The man behind it, Roland Silverstone, was a legend for all the wrong reasons. Elena unfolded the second page, her fingers trembling slightly. "He claims this property falls within a commercial zoning deal he finalized last month. Says our lease is void under a technical clause my father never renewed." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read. "It's a setup. He found a loophole. He's going to try and erase everything Gustavo created." Marco sank into the booth, his hands covering his face. We just started rebuilding. Now we're going to lose it all? Elena's voice, usually soft, came sharp and certain. No, not yet. There's something he doesn't know. Both Keanu and Marco looked up. Before my father passed, she said, he mentioned that the original deed was never officially absorbed into the zoning files. He kept a hard copy, signed, notarized, separate from the city's digital database. He hid it, said it was the only way to protect the restaurant if the wrong people ever tried to buy it out. Where is it? Keanu asked. Elena bit her lip. He never told me exactly, just said it was hidden in the bones of the place. Marco stood. You mean, it's here? Somewhere, she said. He was always clever. He used to say, the recipe to protect a dream is written between the bricks. Keanu looked around the restaurant, his eyes scanning the walls, the corners, the wooden beams above. We'll find it. The next few hours became a quiet search party. With the doors locked and the lights dimmed, the three of them moved through the restaurant like detectives in a mystery film. Elena checked the office drawers and storage. Rooms. Marco searched the pantry and basement. Keanu, calm and deliberate, walked the floor, feeling the edges of walls, tapping on floorboards, searching for anything out of place. Behind the bar, beneath the wine rack, Keanu paused. He ran his hand along a panel of wood that felt warmer than the rest. Something clicked. Literally. He pressed again. A small panel opened inward with a soft creak, revealing a narrow, hollow space between the wall and the cabinet. Inside was a dusty leather envelope. I think this is it, Keanu said, pulling it free. They gathered around as Elena opened it with careful hands. Inside was a document wrapped in thin plastic. It was yellowed by time but perfectly intact. At the bottom was Gustavo's signature, bold and certain. Beside it, the notary seal and a single sentence. Ownership granted in full to community trustee. In perpetuity, tears welled in Elena's eyes. He wasn't just saving it for me. He saved it for everyone. Keanu nodded. This gives us power. But just as they stood there, breathing with fresh hope, Marco's phone buzzed. Message. No name, just a number. Check the news. He opened it and clicked the link. His jaw tightened. The headline screamed across the screen. Famous restaurant under fire. Keanu Reeves tied to illegal property dispute. A photo of Keanu walking out of the restaurant taken last night was plastered under the headline. The article twisted the story, claiming Keanu was using his fame to bully a property transfer. Silverstone had already leaked a fabricated story, pushing the idea that Gustavo's will was a fraud, that Keanu was interfering in city records. He's turning the public against us, Marco said, his voice shaking with anger. Elena backed. Away, the document clutched to her chest. He's fast and ruthless. Keanu remained quiet, staring at the screen. But inside, something had shifted. His kindness was still there, but now it burned with purpose, not revenge, not pride. Something more powerful, protection. He thinks he can control the story, Keanu said. But he's wrong. This place isn't a headline, it's a heartbeat. Marco looked at him. What do we do? Keanu turned to both of them, his voice strong but low. We fight. Not with lawyers or headlines. We show the truth. We invite the people back in. We open the doors and we let them see what Gustavo built. You mean throw an event? Elena asked. Yes, Keanu said. A night of stories, music, food, free entry. We'll invite anyone who ever worked here, anyone Gustavo helped, and we'll tell them the truth. Marco hesitated. And Silverstone? He'll be watching, Keanu replied. But if he sees the soul of this place is still alive, he'll lose his leverage. Marco nodded slowly. I've never cooked for war before. Keanu smiled gently. Then cook for peace and let it be louder. They began preparing that night. The word spread like wildfire. Keanu Reeves was hosting a private event in a legendary restaurant with a secret history. Social media lit up. Old staff members, retired cooks, past customers, they all reached out. Within 24 hours, the guest list was overflowing. But while the kitchen began to breathe life again, somewhere in a high-rise office downtown, Roland Silverstone leaned back in his chair, watching the buzz unfold. He sipped his wine slowly and turned to his assistant. "Send the letter," he said coldly. "If they open those doors tomorrow night, we sue before the dessert." The night of the forgotten flames, the sun dipped low behind the Los Angeles skyline, casting a warm amber glow over the street where Gustavo's restaurant stood, just as it had for decades. But tonight, it pulsed with a different energy. The windows glowed brighter. The front door, usually reserved for the refined few, was propped wide open. Music floated softly through the air, an old tune Gustavo once hummed while peeling potatoes in the back. Everything felt touched by memory. Marco stood at the head of the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up, the white of his apron now marked by flour, oil, and sweat. He had not shouted once all day. He had not insulted or demanded. Instead, he moved between his staff like an old friend, checking dishes, offering nods of approval, and repeating just one line: "Let's cook like it's our last night to say thank you." Elena moved between tables and guests, guiding them with the grace of someone who wasn't hosting a dinner, but welcoming them home. Her eyes lit up each time she recognized an old face, someone who had once worked alongside her father, or a customer who remembered Gustavo's signature stew. Many brought photos, even handwritten notes from decades ago, stories of how Gustavo had helped them during hard times. And then, just as the crowd swelled to capacity, Keanu walked in through the back. No spotlight, no red carpet. He moved silently through the shadows of the kitchen, checking everything. Then into the dining room, where he stopped just long enough to shake hands, hug a few old staffers, and share quiet smiles with strangers who never thought they'd meet him in such a place. The evening was not meant to be loud. It was meant to be felt. And it was. Each dish that left the kitchen was a piece of the past reborn. Marco had recreated several of Gustavo's original recipes, following notes Elena had found in the old folder. Dishes with strange names and humble ingredients. Yet they brought tears to the eyes of those who remembered them. At one table, a man in a mechanic's uniform bit into a bowl of garlic stew and whispered, "He made this for me the day I lost my job. Told me the salt in the soup would keep my tears company." Across the room, a mother held her son's hand as they tasted warm bread drizzled in honey and cinnamon. "Your grandfather made this," she said softly. "It was the only sweet thing we had during winter." Keanu stood in the back, leaning against a wall, arms folded. His eyes were glassy, but he smiled. And then, just as dessert began to roll out, a storm came knocking. A courier in a dark suit pushed through the crowd, found Marco near the kitchen, and handed him an envelope. "You've been served," the man said flatly, before turning and leaving. Marco stared at it like it was made of fire. Elena rushed over, pulling the seal open with shaking fingers. She read aloud, her voice faltering. "Due to reported zoning violations and unregistered changes to the lease, the premises of Gustavo's table are subject to forced closure, effective midnight tonight." A gasp rippled through the room. The music faded. Marco looked at Keanu. "He's trying to shut us down tonight. While they're still eating." Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm. "Then we don't stop. Not until they finish their plates. Not until the last story is told." But Silverstone had planned this move with precision. Outside, 2 city officials arrived with badges and a clipboard, flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit. "This establishment is in violation of updated commercial zone statutes," the lawyer said coldly. "You are ordered to cease all public activity within 30 minutes. Elena stepped forward. "We have the original deed, signed by Gustavo, notarized. It protects the trust," the lawyer sneered. "A signature on an old piece. of paper doesn't override state-approved zoning updates. The land now falls under corporate interest. Keanu took the envelope from Elena's hands and handed it to the officials. Read it. This isn't a business. This is a trust protected by a legacy. And tonight, it's alive. But the officials shook their heads. We don't make the rules, we just enforce them. Someone near the door shouted, "What's happening?" A woman with a cane stood, concerned. Are they closing us down? Keanu turned toward the guests, his voice raised just enough to carry. This may be our last night. And they want us to stop early. But Gustavo once said that food is the only thing in this world that speaks every language. So let's speak until they silence us. A cheer went up. The crowd stood in unity. Plates clinked louder. Glasses were raised. Voices rose in laughter and shared memory. A choir of old staffers in aprons took to the tiny stage near the window and sang an old Italian song Gustavo used to play on his radio. The officials hesitated. They had not expected resistance like this. They had not expected love to look like fire. Marco stood in the kitchen, shouting for more bread, more sauce, more bowls. Cook like the fire can't touch you, he yelled. And still, the food kept flowing, until a voice cut through the room like a blade. That's enough. It was cold, sharp, practiced. Roland Silverstone himself had arrived. He stood at the entrance like a ghost in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. You're trespassing on my property, he said. Keanu stepped forward. You're trespassing on a promise, he replied. Silverstone smirked. You think kindness is stronger than contracts? No, Keanu said. But kindness outlives them. Silverstone walked slowly through the room, scanning the guests. He paused at an elderly man showing a child a black and white photo of Gustavo. This place, Silverstone said, is a relic, a broken plate glued together with sentiment, and I'm here to break it clean. He pulled a document from his coat and handed it to the nearest official. This is a court order, he said. They are to vacate immediately. But before the official could respond, a hand reached out and snatched the paper away. It was the mayor of Los Angeles. She had entered unnoticed, dressed casually, standing beside the same woman with the cane. I was here the night Gustavo opened this place, she said. He served me soup when I had nothing in my pocket. You want to shut this place down? You'll do it over my signature. And I'm not signing. Gasps filled the room. Silverstone froze. The mayor held the court order high and turned to the crowd. This restaurant is a cultural landmark. Effective immediately, I am placing a hold on all demolition orders pending review. Cheers erupted. Marco fell to his knees in the kitchen, overwhelmed. Keanu smiled, not with victory, but with peace. Silverstone stormed out, his plan undone. But just before the doors closed behind him, he looked over his shoulder. This isn't over, he growled, and Keanu, still calm, replied, It never is. That's how legends are made. The taste of something eternal. The morning after the storm did not begin with sirens or shouting. It began with light, soft, golden, and almost forgiving. It poured through the restaurant windows, landing on tables where crumbs of last night's bread still remained. The chairs were still slightly tilted, the floor still sticky from joy spilled in haste, and the kitchen was quiet, but not empty. It breathed. Marco stood alone, early as the sun, staring at the steel counters. He hadn't slept. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but there was a stillness in him he hadn't known in years. Not defeat. Not even relief. Just a quiet knowing that something inside him had broken. And maybe it was the best thing that ever happened. He thought of Gustavo. Not the legend, but the man he had never met. The man who had written recipes with laughter, not ego. Who believed a meal was a bridge, not a spotlight. Marco wondered what Gustavo might say if he walked through the door right now. Maybe nothing. Maybe he'd just tie an apron around his waist and start chopping onions. The door creaked open behind him. Keanu entered with a box in his hands. What's that? Marco asked. Memories, Keanu said. Found it in a dusty closet behind my garage. Old letters, photos, some scribbled menus. Gustavo wrote down things no one else saw. They opened the box together. Inside were dozens of little notes, some written on napkins, others on stained parchment. Many were advice. Not about food, but life. Listen to your dishwasher. He's the only one who knows what's left behind. The guest who says nothing. Maybe the one who needs your kindness most. Salt doesn't heal, but it remembers where the wound is. Marco smiled, tears rising again. I spent so long chasing perfection, he said. I forgot food was never about that. Perfection doesn't stay, Keanu replied, but warmth does. Elena arrived shortly after, bringing fresh coffee and a newspaper. The headline on the front page had replaced last night's smear campaign. It now read, Keanu Reeves saves restaurant built on kindness. Mayor declares it a city treasure. Beneath it, a photo captured the moment Keanu stood beside the mayor, the guests behind them raising their glasses. It looked like a scene from a film, but it wasn't fiction. It was truth born in fire. Silverstone's lawyers backed off after the city stepped in, Elena said. He'll move on. He always does. Keanu nodded. He builds walls. We build doors. The following week brought change, not just in paperwork, but in spirit. The restaurant remained open, but now it was something new, something older. It wasn't a high-end restaurant anymore. It became Gustavo's table again. They took down the glossy celebrity photos and replaced them with snapshots of real moments. An old dishwasher laughing beside Gustavo, a single mom hugging her son outside the front steps, a young Keanu with a mop in hand and a grin on his face. Marco didn't wear his embroidered name tag anymore. He wore a plain apron and cooked on the line with his team. He took breaks to sit with guests, to hear their stories, to understand what they needed beyond the food. One night, weeks later, a young boy came in with his father. They looked nervous, underdressed and slightly lost. Marco noticed immediately. He walked over, knelt down beside the table and smiled. First time? He asked. The boy nodded. What would you like? Marco continued. I don't know, the boy whispered. Just something warm. Marco didn't go back to the menu. He turned to the kitchen and made something simple. Gustavo's old garlic stew. He added a slice of bread, toasted with love, and brought it back himself. The boy's eyes lit up. The father's shoulders softened. Marco sat nearby, just watching them eat. And in that moment, he finally understood. The legacy wasn't in the fame or the furniture. It was in that look, that quiet sigh of comfort, the taste of something familiar, something that told people, you are safe here. That night, when the restaurant finally closed and the staff cleaned up with laughter instead of silence, Marco stood at the back door and looked up at the stars. Keanu joined him, coffee in hand. So, Keanu asked gently, how does it feel? Marco didn't answer right away. Then he smiled. Feels like I'm finally feeding people. Keanu clinked his coffee cup against Marco's. You always were, he said. You just forgot who was at the table. They stood in silence for a while, no more words needed, and somewhere, in the flicker of a kitchen light, Gustavo's spirit smiled.